15, 17, 18, 19, and 20.
Good evening, and welcome to Temple Brotherhood. As many of you know, we're offering a 13-year-old extremely rare bottle of Elijah Craig. Order forms are at the Temple website, and sales will benefit the Stanley Frager Scholarship Fund and go to keep enhancing the video system which you're watching right now. Our dream is to buy 2 more cameras to make it a better experience. We now have a fundraiser, and we have one person that offered to match whatever comes in up to 50% of the cost of the cameras. I'd also like to thank the Niver family for their generous support and generous donation for the video system. Joining us this evening is Max Shapira, president of Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's begin at the beginning, Max. Tell us about the origins of Heaven Hill.
Well, Michael, thank you for having me. But let me start off with a little plug for what you just said about that full barrel of Elijah Craig that the Temple Brotherhood is invested in. To everybody, they should know there's 180 bottles that's going to come out of that one barrel. That is really an exclusive, unusual, out of the ordinary whiskey. I think that you've actually underpriced it to what you're going to price it for, because this is a one-of-a-kind, one type, one barrel. It's never going to be duplicated, and it is a special barrel honoring Isaac Mayer Wise as well. So I urge you and urge all the congregation to get in on this, because it might be something special. It is a very special and unusual whiskey, I will tell you that. So with that said, that's my plug for the evening. But with that said, let me tell you a little bit about what I call a very unusual entrance into a very exciting industry. Now, I'm going to go back not to when it was founded in 1935, which means that we're getting ready to celebrate our 85th anniversary. But I'm going to go back to the turn of the century, just before that, to the late 1890s, when my grandfather immigrated from Lithuania. He came to the United States and ultimately found his way to Kentucky, settled in a little town called New Haven, Kentucky, and as many Jewish and maybe other people did at that time, he really had no trade, but he became a peddler. And he went out calling house to house, selling notions, things like thimbles and threads and other simple household utensils. That business got a little bit better, and he was able to buy a horse and a carriage and did the same thing. And then that business got a little bit better, and ultimately he established what we call a junior department store located in New Haven. Ultimately, he had 5 sons, and when those 5 sons became of age, they were sent out to open similar kinds of stores in small Kentucky towns, primarily the county seats of various counties in the central Kentucky area, one of which happened to be Bardstown. And that was all occurring in the middle 1920s. Now, think about your history. 2 things happened. In 1920, Prohibition started. It didn't end until 1933. In 1929, you had the great crash in September on Wall Street and the beginning of the Great Depression. So you had these 2 very historical events happen. During Prohibition, the business of these junior department stores actually thrived, because they were selling socks for 10 cents a pair, a shirt for $1.50, and maybe a suit for a wedding or a funeral or whatever for $15, basic necessities. And even though economic times were bad, the business people needed these basic necessities, and the business actually thrived. So by the late 1920s, everyone could see that Prohibition was the wrong way to have kind of social change in the country, and it was probably going to be repealed. Bardstown had been a hotbed, a center of the American whiskey business, the bourbon business, pre-Prohibition. So there were a lot of individuals around who had all the technical expertise to be able to run a distillery. So along about 1932, 33, when this was going to be nearly imminent, a group who had the technical expertise came to my dad, who was living in Bardstown running the junior department store there, and asked him to be a part of a new venture. Now, my dad and his four brothers, the five of them, they were very conservative individuals. And here in the middle of the Depression, the worst of the Depression, someone's coming to you and asking you to be an investor in a business that you had not even remotely an idea what it was all about. And you had to rely on these individuals to be able to build a distillery, etc. But again, terrible economic conditions, no distillery there, no inventory, no warehouses, no brands. You talk about risk, that had to be on the highest risk profile of just about any kind of investment that you were thinking about. But the five brothers were young. They were excited about an industry starting from scratch. Remember, it had been out of business for some 13 years, so it wasn't like there were a lot of inventories around that someone else could come in, buy, and start a brand. Everybody had to start really from ground zero. So they invested $15,000. That was a lot of money in 1935 in the middle of the Depression into the business. And the distillery was built. Production started in 1935. Actually, it was a Friday the 13th, December the 13th, 1935. So we're getting ready to celebrate our 85th anniversary in about 2.5 weeks from now. But after about 18 months, the individuals who had all the technical expertise came to my dad and said, we have a personal financial problem. You're either going to have to buy us out, or we're going to have to liquidate this in some way, or we have to get out of our personal financial problems. The family at that point met. I can just see it on a Sunday morning or whatever, debating this back and forth. And ultimately for approximately $25,000, so it was $40,000 invested in this initially, they bought really all the stock of all the outside group who had all the technical expertise, and took a very deep breath because they still knew nothing about running a distillery. My dad, who was living in Bardstown, was given the job to see if he could actually make this thing a growing proposition. So my dad told me they could have brought out something early before it was really fully matured to give some cash flow. But he said we waited and waited and waited until we had something that we thought was of really high quality. And we brought out a brand called Old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. Bottled and Bond was really important because during Prohibition, so much bad whiskey, moonshine, the words for rot gut was describing some of the whiskey. It was so bad, people were dying of methanol poisoning, bad whiskey, people were giving color to the whiskey by putting iodine in it. So Bottled and Bond was extremely important because the Bottled and Bond Act was passed by Congress in 1895 to establish standards of identity for the production of American whiskeys. So if you had Bottled and Bond on your label, that meant that the government had inspected everything that you were doing during the production process, and that the whiskey was of very good, merchantable quality. So they waited. That brand, Old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, quickly became the largest selling bourbon whiskey in the state of Kentucky, and the family said at that point, this might actually one of these days really develop into a nice business. Now, in the years, that was in 1939 when that whiskey was brought out. The stories are endless between 1939 and here we are in 2020. If I were to go through all of it, we'd be here till about midnight. And while I hope we have a loyal following that's watching this, I don't know that we would have that loyal following for too much to hear all of that. But let me just tell you a few quick pieces of the ups and downs. Just as we're getting started, 1939, 1940, and 1941, all of a sudden World War II breaks out. The government, federal government, came to us, and in your patriotic duty, they said, we're going to ask all the distillers throughout the country to close their facilities down, to produce alcohol for the war effort. And of course, when the government asks you to do something like that, in a critical time like that in your country's history, you do it. And so that's what happened. That, of course, created problems because all of a sudden you had a wide gap in your inventories when the war was over in 1945. In 1945, there was tremendous production because everybody was anxious to get inventories back in the supply chain, if you will. In addition to that, as the early 1950s came along, it appeared that we were going to get involved in another war, which we did, and that was the Korean War, and that everybody thought that the federal government would ask us to make alcohol again. That did not occur, but because we had that threat, everybody was making tremendous quantities of whiskey. So as a result, there was an oversupply, prices plunged, and there was not much innovation. It was just putting whiskey out of a barrel that was being aged in a warehouse into a glass bottle, and any old label would do. It was a financial question of making sure the inventories were actually being accounted for and being used. Then we went through a period of time of several recessions, but there was a real long-term period in the American whiskey business where the bourbon business was just not being sought after by consumers really all around the country. The reason for that was consumer tastes were changing. They were more interested at that point in lighter tasting types of distilled spirits. Vodka for one, gin and tonic became a big kind of drink, rum. So those were eating into the market share, and frankly, in the late 50s, early 60s, the most outside analysts were consigning the American whiskey category to that great liquor store in the sky. It wasn't like it was sliding off and declining at a rapid rate, but it was just a point that there was simply not much growth. During that period of time, we had developed a good selection of customers, distributors, wholesalers, basically all around the country, and had a great network of independent, family-owned distributors who liked the way we did business. They asked us for additional products. So along about the middle 60s, we started diversifying the product line. I ultimately came back to the company in 1970, saw this distribution network, and we thought it was just a natural to be able to continue to expand our product line in a very broad sense. So from that point forward, starting in about 1989, through a lot of internal product development, lots of brand acquisitions along the way, we've diversified that big, broad, to have a big, broad portfolio that encompasses basically all distilled spirits types domestically, lots of imported products as well. But all during this time, the American whiskey category, again, was sort of struggling. Finally, in about the late 1980s, the industry gets it right and starts to see that germ of growth that we'd all been waiting for. How did all that happen? Consumers' taste changed again. Younger consumers wanted to drink something different than their dads drank. Younger consumers were interested in understanding more about innovative, different kinds of mash bills. They were interested in aged products. They were interested in different alcohol strengths. The industry finally understood the process of developing terrific packaging to entice the consumer to a very iconic American product. So this all was occurring beginning in the late 80s and the 90s. Finally, by the late 1990s, we were definitely in the midst of the bourbon renaissance. That's continued to this day, and today the prospects for the American whiskey category are the best they've ever been in pretty much the entire industry's history. We were very fortunate that during the period of when we were diversifying the product line, that helped us lay the platform for what we wanted to do as we went forward in the future. And this American whiskey renaissance and the growth that we've had in that has been quite incredible and quite unexpected, I might add. So that gives you just a very top-level view of how we got into the business and sort of the history involved along the way.
Good, thank you. Prior to 1970, you were seeking your fortune on Wall Street. So what prompted you to return to Kentucky?
Oh my. Well, I was one of these people who, I guess, was born into the business. When I was a kid, all around the dinner table, it was breakfast. It wasn't just dinner. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There was whiskey talk, and more whiskey talk. I always remember my dad bringing home customers. They always seemed to get along. They always seemed to be talking about something that everybody was excited about. So I was brought up in that kind of atmosphere. My first job was when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I was opening and closing the gates to make certain that the trucks could go in and out. Now, it doesn't sound like a big-time job. Well, it really wasn't. But for an 8 or 9-year-old to let these big tractor trailers in and out was really quite a thrill. I had many other jobs throughout when I was growing up. I was a plant messenger. That was way before the days of fax machines or internet or whatever. And there were government papers that needed to be taken to the government department. There were bottling orders that needed to be taken to the bottling facilities. There were production of new whiskey kinds of activities that needed to have communication. So I was a plant messenger. I got to know everything about the business. This was really at a very young age, but it was pretty exciting. Everybody seemed to be having fun and seemed to be interested in what they were doing. I always remember the time when I was a bit older. I was working over in the shipping department, putting cases on trucks to go out to customers, and it was no air conditioning. It was a hot summer days, day after day. It was hot, sweaty, dirty kind of work. I remember somebody came over from the office and said to me, "Max, you know, your dad said you're just going to be here a couple more weeks, and he thought maybe you'd want to go over to the office just to sort of get an idea of what was going on over there." It took me about a second and a half to make that decision because the office was at least air conditioned. I didn't care what they had me do at that point. But anyway, so I left, went to college, graduate school, started working on Wall Street. It was a great experience there. I always knew that in the back of my mind there was this great, interesting business in Kentucky. But I loved what I was doing when I was in New York, and I could have made a career out of that. But ultimately, a few things came together, and Ellen and I had gotten married by that time, and we decided together that we would come back. So there we are. It was the call of something that was part of your DNA. But again, I could have done what I was doing in New York for a very long time. Never look back, though. It was the best decision ever, because I tell everybody, since I came back, they said, "Well, how long have you been working at the company?" I said, "I've never worked at the company a day in my life." It goes back to the old story. If you like something you're doing, if you're excited about what you're doing every day, then it's not work. And that's the way I've approached things throughout my whole career.
Good. So we learned the history of Heaven Hill, and we learned, how you got started, your past. Let's talk about the future. Were you and Ellen talking breakfast, lunch, and dinner, bourbon and whiskey? Where is the future lie with Heaven Hill?
Well, the answer to this is we do talk breakfast, lunch, and dinner practically about whiskey. That is it's a family business. If anybody learns anything about this little session that we're having here tonight, they should take away that Heaven Hill is a quintessential family-owned and operated business. That gives us the opportunity to look at things from the long-term horizon. We can row our own boat. We can make decisions for the long term. In fact, we view the business not just on a 3-year planning cycle or a 5-year planning cycle or a 10-year planning cycle. We look at the business from a generational aspect. So for me, the future is as bright as the past. I can only think of the excitement that my dad and his brothers had in 1935, starting this enterprise, and the enthusiasm and the focus that they had for the business, and thinking what might come out of this. Today, I look at it the same way, that same sense of enthusiasm and desire to grow our business, a desire to do the right thing for all of our employees scattered all over the country and all around the world. Those are the key things that drive you every single day. But it's that sense of enthusiasm. The opportunities are endless out there, and we're looking forward to the future as much as the past. I mean, the past is history, but it's given us this great platform of a base on which we can do a lot of things as we go forward to the future.
5 times a year, the Temple Brotherhood has a Torah celebration. And for the Oneg, we always celebrate with bourbon. And we have Evan Williams single barrel bourbon. And we tried to introduce your honey flavored, and the purists put up a big fight, so we removed that from our list. Tell us about your other brands. You're just not bourbon and rye.
No, but that's an interesting story that you just said. The purists didn't want to have the honey flavored bourbon. When we brought this out when we brought the flavored bourbons out, not all that many years ago, the purists, I don't think were too interested in wanting us to bring those out. We had master distillers there along the way. Parker Bean was one of the great iconic master distillers of the entire industry. It was like, he said, well, if you want to do that, that's fine, but I'm not quite sure about it. Well, it turned out to be very successful, but that's an interesting story that you just told there. But the purists didn't want to use it for the services. But to get back to your question, today, think of Heaven Hill as that iconic American whiskey company. And indeed, that is the heart and the soul. It's the DNA of who we are and what we do. But the interesting thing that people don't understand is through all of the internal product development, the brand acquisitions that we made over the years, that the bourbon business is as important as it is, and it's hugely important, and it's an unbelievable business today, but that is really only about 20 or 25% of our overall business. So we've, as I said, diversified the product line. Within the bourbon category, we've diversified. We make 7 different styles of whiskey, ranging from just our traditional rye bourbon. We have a wheated bourbon. We have a wheat whiskey. We have rye whiskeys. We've got corn whiskeys. We even make some malt whiskey along the way. So even within the American whiskey category, we've diversified the product line, and it ranges from brands like Evan Williams, which is the name of the first commercial distiller in the state of Kentucky, here in Louisville. We have a visitor center here in Louisville to memorialize his name. Other historic brands include brands like Henry McKenna, Elijah Craig, who made his whiskey in 1789. So these go back many years. These back to the earliest days of the United States. And then we have specialty bourbons like Parker's Heritage Reserve, which has been a really a unique whiskey where there's a different style in limited quantities produced every year. And this year it's a 10-year-old deep charred barrel whiskey, really exquisitely different. Just really a very few hundred barrels, very few hundred cases of these products are on the market today. So beyond that, beyond the American whiskey category, we have brands like Deep Eddy Vodka, which is a premium vodka that we purchased a few years ago. In the rum category, we have a brand called Admiral Nelson, which is the second largest selling spiced rum in the industry. We just recently brought a brand called Black Velvet Canadian Whiskey, which is the second largest selling Canadian whiskey in the world. So, and I could go on with a whole range of other brands that we have in lots of categories. But it's a pretty broadly diversified business today. Bourbon still is like the heart and soul.
So you probably hear this all the time. The number one question everyone has, what's your favorite?
When you started to ask me that question, I knew what that question was going to be because I do get asked that all the time. There's no clear-cut answer to that. If somebody's going to be expecting me to answer that, it's this brand or that brand. It's really sort of a mood, it's a place, it's a time. You know, in the summertime, a whiskey sour made with Evan Williams is as light, a flavorful, and great tasteful drink to have by the pool or at an outdoor picnic or barbecue or whatever. In the winter, it may be an Elijah Craig with just a splash of ginger ale or just an Elijah Craig in water. And other times it's a more detailed cocktail with lots of different additives to it. So it's really all about what you like. You know, I always say that some people like a whiskey, it's sort of like for its aroma, for its taste, for its age, for the type of whiskey it is. And the best way that they can to find out what their favorite bourbon would be to go and buy 4 or 5 different bottles and then put it into carafe at home, each of them, and to take drinks out of each one, and over a course of a few weeks or a few months, decide on which one they like, and that would be the one that they may want to always buy. It could be one that sells for $15 or $25 or $35 or $45. But the tastes are so different from one taste style to another that it's a personal kind of acquired taste.
I bought a bottle of, I think it was Master Distiller's Blend, white label, downtown at your store, the Evan Williams store. Amazing. I've never had anything quite like this. And this was a blend that you put together. It was Master Distiller's Blend. And, you know, that was like one of those unique finds that I've had. The other thing, I quote you all the time. And you said to me once, you know, it's important to add a little bit of water to wake up the bourbon. So in addition to water, people use those big ice cubes. They drink it neat. They have cracked ice. Is there any right or wrong way to drink bourbon?
However you like it is the way it should be consumed. If you like it on the rocks with a large ice cube or chipped ice, perfect. You know, we sell all around the country, we sell all around the world. In some parts of the world, bourbon is consumed with fruit juices. Now that may some people may look askance to that who are traditionalists within our industry. But we as a company, and I think we as an industry, have adopted that if you like it with fruit juice, that's it, that's fine. If you like it on the rocks, fine. If you like it a bourbon and Coke, that's fine as well. Or if you like it in with some other kind of mixer, all of that is just perfect. It's just how it's your preference, and how you like it is the way you should be consumed.
The e-commerce has changed dramatically the way we do business, and you know, you have a Facebook presence, you have a tremendous website. And how has this impacted your business and the industry?
Well, up until recently, it had been a relatively small part of the business. The COVID pandemic has changed the whole perspective on that. As individuals want to order directly from their favorite package stores, and they want it efficiently to be delivered quickly. So that business has gone from just a tiny piece of business. It's up by several 100% in just a very short period of time. Most of that is delivery. There's very little of it in the spirit side of the business that is direct from consumer, where an individual would buy it directly from our company. We would ship it to them. That's due to a myriad of different state laws in doing business in this industry. There's 50 states. There's 50 different set of rules and regulations, many, if not most of which, do not even allow for that kind of activity. So most of it is a delivery system, but it's up rather smartly from a very low base, but the opportunity now is for it to be a much larger piece of the business as we go forward.
When a group of us drove down 2 years ago to buy our very first barrel, we were coming into Bardstown, and we saw all of this construction, building rick house after rick house after rick house. You've invested in your tasting room down in Bardstown with the secret star above. The Evan Williams is a tremendous investment, your distillery. Plus you pay tax. As soon as that bottle rolls off, you pay tax. That's a huge investment that you make.
Well, this is a capital-intensive business. I mean, we're forecasting demand in the American whiskey side of the business 4 and 6 and 8 and 10 and 12 years and even more down the road. So we are laying down whiskey today. We're producing whiskey today that we're not going to be using for consumption for years from now. So the barrels that's an expensive inventory, and that's an expensive part of the business. So it's very heavily capital intensive. We believe that when you're doing that, you're taking that chance that the consumers are going to be positive about your brand years into the future. That's what brand building is all about, to build the equity in your brands, and that's what we're doing today to secure the long-term future of your brands.
We have time for one more question. Are you open at your Evan Williams downtown and your tourist area down in Bardstown? Are you seeing people coming in or wanting to travel on the Bourbon Trail?
We're seeing some of that. Of course, given the situation with the COVID pandemic, operations are cut back so that we can absolutely make sure that everybody has a high degree of safety whenever they come visit. So both facilities, the attendance has been reduced from what it would normally be during the course of this past summer and what it would even be now. But we do have people who come. That business is alive and well. It's just a little on the reduced side now. But that's really one of the great ways that we have to be able to talk to consumers one-on-one. I always sort of tell everybody that those individuals who work in our visitor center, that they're the most important people in the company, because they're the ones who greet every individual who comes to visit, who's expecting to hear about the history of the company, a bit about history of the industry, and to walk away understanding and knowing and had great times. And we want that to make certain that happens to every individual who comes visit with us.
Good. I want to thank you for joining us. My conversation with Max Shapira, president of Heaven Hill Distilleries. He has a unique Kentucky business, and the bourbon is going throughout the world. I want to thank you, Max, for taking your time to joining us this evening. And thank you for joining us as well. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Did it work out all right, you think?